develop all the higher learning functions. So there is a danger to it. We in the medical industry don't prefer recreational use, because using cannabis, like any plant or any drug, even vaccines used at the wrong time, can be extremely dangerous if you don't understand what you're doing with it. So it's really a double-edged sword that you appreciate. Because it's not. I don't recommend that parents use various CBD or THC CBD oils or products really without consulting a knowledgeable medical professional. And you mentioned that that's not usually available. The good news is that breastfeeding is often the last time most infants and babies and people receive their endogenous cannabinoids, because we make anandamide is the endogenous THC. It means joy in Sanskrit, so as you probably know. So the endogenous, we can stimulate the production of your own cannabinoids and avoid using phytocannabinoids, plant-based cannabinoids, and drugs during critical times where you don't want necessarily to have immunosuppression. So, if we can, the reason why I'm delighted to talk to you about this today is because if we can recognize that and take the stigma away from the use of plants, stop of this plant family, stop calling it weed, and really start studying and using it there are universities, as you mentioned. We've long worked with Johns Hopkins University and Vincent DiMarzo, who has done an awful lot of work with cannabinoids in not only autoimmune disease, but cancers associated with retroviruses, like prostate cancer. And I mentioned at the beginning of the show, the AIDS patients, what we found in the 80s, and it's the movie The Dallas Buyers Club kind of highlights this a little bit, but stays away from it a little bit. But when you use existing chemotherapies and use at the same time cannabis in the form of food, edibles, oils, things like that, you can actually stop some of the side effects, like the vomiting or the lack of sleep, and the cachexia, the extreme weight loss, which is often what kills the patient. So rational combination of cannabis, edibles, oils, and even pills has been used very successfully, at least the last decade or so, worldwide, with both synthetics and plant-based. But the synthetics are very, very dangerous, because you're talking about critical pathways, and you can actually, we know of deaths with some of the synthetics, because if you block, for instance, there was a drug made by, it doesn't matter, a drug made for the pain receptor known as TRPV1, trans receptor potential vanilloid number 1, and that's your hot and cold pain sensor. But the drug never made it to market, because you could literally put your hand in a fire and watch it burn, and you would die before you felt pain. Their channels, their ion channels, their G coupled proteins. That's the science behind it that Kent tries to take out of my book, but that they're very important signaling molecules on every cell in the body, and it's in the crosstalk between the neurons, the nerve cells, and the immune cells is just critical. Not every cell in the body, every immune and pain receptor neuron and nerve cell. So it's really, really important to know what you're doing. But in fact, we've done this successfully for at least 30 years, and in the recognition. So our book, Plague of Corruption, is really about the corruption of all of medicine, not only enforcing therapeutics on people without any informed consent in dangerous drugs like the vaccine, but like the vaccines, but also in preventing Americans from using and knowing and doing research and developing cannabis as therapies for any number of things, any number of conditions. We could change everything with cannabis, and we could do it tomorrow because the drugs exist.
It's fascinating. I want to go back to something that you said about using the plant substance in its whole and the dangers of manipulating the plant substances into synthetic drugs, basically.
Right.
I just wonder, this is something I've been very concerned about with the advent of legalization of cannabis, in that now it will open up doorways for pharmaceuticals to come in and sort of play with the plant and create something that's going to be a lot more profitable for them, but will take the rather miraculous nature of the plant itself out of the medicine. And
correct.
I'm almost wondering if eventually, we're at this period in history where we need to start getting back to basics. And one of the things, obviously, that most people are concerned about, if they trust science as opposed to trust, political agendas, is climate change. And, I'm a big believer that hemp is something that could really help us get back to nature in terms of creating things without altering our lifestyle, making plastics, for instance, out of, hemp biomass, as opposed to using, the highly carbon consumptive and toxic fossil fuels, just as an example, or, quit deforestation to make paper or building materials and use hemp instead. So when it comes to transitioning into plant-based medicine, which really sustained human life for thousands and thousands of years, and get away from the toxicity of these chemicals that are being manufactured, en masse by pharmaceutical companies that are basically, killing people left and right. It's almost genocide level killing that's going on with these chemicals that just aren't meant to be ingested by humans.
Right.
So
yeah.
So we almost need to, I think, there are a lot of people who might disagree with the level of regulation from the government, but the absence of certain regulations is causing human death. And if people can just start to understand that and start putting pressure on their congressional representatives to go back and revisit some of the deregulation that's happened in certain industries, and particularly in the pharmaceutical industry, and start demanding that the FDA, rather than approving a drug if it has a 30% success rate, maybe they start approving drugs that only pass certain criteria, like they don't cause human harm. And the destigmatization of the cannabis plant is a good place to start. But I'm wondering, in your experience, is there a way that a pharmaceutical company can adhere to nature and be as profitable, rather than make these drugs that, just don't consider all of these things that you've brought up in your books? Mm-hmm. What can we do to try to fix this problem?
Absolutely. And in fact, my training and my first job was making cancer therapies out of plants in 1980. And so those therapies I talked about, and there are companies that exist right now that make drugs out of plants that have gone away from synthetics, but those companies can't get their drugs to market because of the corruption and the control of the pharmaceutical industries who want these synthetics. And so it's interesting because the timing is similar. Let's just say since the mid 60s, the timing is similar, where we've moved away from plants in the 80s with all of this recombinant technology, and now the big oh my god is the trillions of dollars spent on these drugs. They are doing more harm than good, and in fact a very simple change can be made, because you mentioned the Food and Drug Administration, and if you think about it, the Food and Drug Administration is only there for safety. They only tell you when your food is dangerous. They don't tell you, for instance, they identify that there's a batch of spinach that has salmonella or whatever in it. They don't tell you what food to eat or what food you can't eat. Yet they gave themselves the authority to tell you not only what drug is safe to be used in whatever condition or way, and I mean the you is the medical professionals, but they tell you it's not, you can't use certain drugs in certain things. They tell you not only safety, but efficacy. So we can simply change everything, saying it's back to the medical professional, and the FDA has no right to determine, as long as a company proves their therapy is safe. They don't have to prove it efficacious in this cancer, that cancer, or anything else. As long as you do no harm, a doctor can use whatever they want. That would change everything, and it is a simple fix that I guess Congress, senators, I don't know who has to overturn this, but that authority was given to, the FDA gave themselves that authority, probably bolstered by pharmaceutical companies who wanted to capture the market. I've worked for a company, and in 1994, I think it could be 2004. 2004, the government issued the Botanical Drug Guidance Act. And what that says is, as long you can make a drug not as a single agent synthetic compound, as long as you can identify all the components of the plant and show the bioactivity, and again show the safety in long-term safety studies. So I've worked for a company since 2005 that has a fabulous natural product drug made of some mushrooms and some other plants that we know were. I'm a plant. I make drugs out of plants. That was my original training. And so, and you can easily add cannabis extracts to that and understand how they act biologically. So yes, all of medicine is broken, but there are some simple fixes, because right now, medicine is being legislated by laws, by you can't use this. So I've fought for the last 5 years in various courts across in states, including Arizona and others, saying, legalize medical cannabis for autism, for children, for this cancer, for that cancer. And we usually lose for the stigma of, oh, you're going to hurt them, you're going to turn them into Cheech and Chong and dopers and lose, they'll go psychotic and things like that. And really the opposite is true. If and we change medicine to letting the doctors be appropriately educated and use the compounds. And there are many, many companies that can make these and are making these for these indications. So the FDA really needs to go away or be revamped, to stop this, because that's where the holdup is. This company's drug that I've been working with since 2005 still hasn't gotten FDA approval, because they simply don't want to change the paradigm, and you literally have to pay millions of dollars to get your drug in line so that they look at it and approve it. So we've gone through several safety clinical trials and other things. It's disgusting, really, but the big pharma has corrupted all of the drug industry. And it's not that we don't know how to make drugs from plants. It's that we have to allow manufacturers to make drugs from plants and stop the capture of an entire industry to make synthetics. And that's what's happening. So when those laws change so that the pharmaceutical industry doesn't own our legislation,